All right, we're going to take this on with somebody who's going to give us an interesting perspective on all of this, Tariq Habash, who's a former Biden administration political appointee. Now, he resigned from the U.S. Department of Education last week due to the treatment of Palestinians in Gaza. Pleased to say he joins us from our Washington, D.C. studio. Tariq, good to have you with us here on Al Jazeera. Before we get into the whys and wherefores of your resignation, I'm just curious, as I say, you're a political appointee and you were a member of the government, effectively, that Antony Blinken represents. What goes through your mind when you hear him singing the same old song when he's speaking from Israel, basically backing Israel's efforts in Gaza with weapons that the US supplied?
Yeah, and thank you for having me, Nick. You know, it's hard to hear, unfortunately. You know, we're in a situation where the indiscriminate bombing of over 2 million people in Gaza has continued for over 3 months now, and it's clear that the messaging and the policy is not really shifting. I think there's a clear acknowledgement that there is too much violence, too much harm that has fallen on innocent Palestinian lives, but we continue to fall short of acknowledging the humanity and the right to life for those Palestinians, and it's difficult to hear.
Now, you had a significant, important job in the Biden administration. It's the ongoing situation in Gaza that, of course, forced your hand, and I'm sure you didn't take the decision lightly, but just take us through, if you would, why you did make the decision that you did in the end.
Yeah, listen, I mean, for me, as a Palestinian American, as a Palestinian man, as a Palestinian Christian, you know, my identity is intertwined with everything that's been happening, and the reality is that there has been a near daily dehumanizing effect of our current policies and just what is allowed to persist in terms of the aggression against Palestinian life. And I, you know, for weeks used every avenue I could to raise concerns about these policies, to emphasize the importance of humanizing Palestinians, you know, Palestinian men too, Palestinian Christians who are a significant minority in the region now. And, you know, that message it fell on deaf ears. And it was clear the only thing that I could do in this moment to emphasize my consternation, my concern with the ongoing policy was to resign.
So when you say it fell on deaf ears, what actually happened? Did people just tell you just to keep quiet and not mention it, or how did it unfold?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily like keep quiet. You know, the White House held listening sessions, policy briefings, which was mostly just communicating to us what their assessment of the region is, of the circumstance as it was unraveling. You know, within the Department of Education, there was a lot of understanding, even from the Secretary himself, who I met with and spoke with on numerous occasions, about how the violence was affecting me on a personal level. You know, there was a lot of patience and just constant support from my own building. But I think, you know, being able to communicate about that on a personal level is very different from acknowledging how the broader policies are affecting millions of people in the region and also millions of Americans who broadly support an end to this violence and permanent ceasefire.
Right, we'll come on to that in just a second, but I guess it must have been extremely hard for you to hear what was being said effectively by your boss, the president, when he said he didn't, for example, necessarily trust Palestinian figures for the number of dead.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about that in my letter, that, you know, there are certain things that I think were really dangerous rhetoric that was used by the administration over the last 3 months that allowed and facilitated the level of destruction against the Gaza Strip and the millions of people who live there today. So,
yeah. Now, you talked about the growing support for the Palestinian cause in the United States. The protesters interrupted President Biden's speech yesterday in South Carolina. We're likely to see more of that, I guess, in this election year. To what degree do you think this is going to affect the Democrats' hopes in the polls, the election polls?
Yeah, I think it's up to the president and the Democratic Party more broadly to make a decision, but I think we're seeing it affect that right now. Like you said, there were protests at the church where the president spoke. There were protests across New York City that shut down 4 different tunnels and bridges. You know, this is something that we're starting to see more of because I think the soul of the American people really does believe in an end to the violence here. I think we see a majority of Americans support a ceasefire. We see the vast majority of the Democratic base, younger voters, voters of color, who do not believe that the current policies are reflective of their values. And I think the president has frequently in the last week talked about what 2024 means with respect to protecting democracy from an authoritarian regime that would be possible under Trump. And I think that's a really important and critical message. But I think it's also inconsistent with what the president is doing with respect to his deference to an authoritarian right-wing regime in the Israeli government and its oppression of millions of Palestinians. So.
I was just one final thing. The thing is that Democrats can disagree all they like with President Biden, but what are they going to do? Are they going to just turn turtle and vote for Trump?
No, I think it's up to the president to decide how important his voters are and understanding that they really do value human life regardless of whose lives it is. And it's clear that the current policies, put restrictions on when Palestinian lives matter and when they don't. And I think that's a problem for voters.
Tariq, we do appreciate you coming on to talk to us here at Al Jazeera. Thanks very much indeed. As Tariq Habash, a former Biden administration political appointee who resigned from the Department of Education last week. Thank you, Tariq.